Alchemist.
Another kind of cool idea, but Way of the Four Elements is a mistake. I don't like that.
It's a great way to lower expectations. You come to the table, you're like, don't worry, guys, I'm aware of the four elements. It's like, oh, he's garbage anyways. He can multiclass however he wants. You just balance
It's a
the
big
party
kind
around.
of red alert to the
one less.
DMs. All right, let me lower the challenge rating and everything. Welcome to Monsters Multiclass, your Dungeons & Dragons fix. I'm Kevin Odie.
I'm Jared Bornicle.
And I'm Will Milton.
And we'll be hanging out with you for a while to talk about anything and everything D&D related. On this special episode, we have our friends from the Worldforge pod to help talk about the Artificer Monk multiclass, and then later on Shadows from the Monster Manual. So pull up a chair and stick around for a while.
All right, so before we get into our multiclass, I just wanted to introduce our special guests here, our friends from Worldforge pod, Sam and Piper. If you guys want to just say what it is you do, the floor is yours.
What it is you do, the floor is yours.
Wow, thanks, Dad.
Got him.
Boy. Aren't you glad you invited us on?
Yeah, for sure.
This was a mistake.
We're 20 seconds in and we've already ruined your show. You're welcome.
Oh my gosh.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. I'm Sam, and I suck, and I'm sorry.
And I'm Piper, and I don't suck, and I'm sorry about that too. Thanks for having us, guys.
Yeah, we're very excited to be here.
Yeah, no problem. I think we'll probably not regret it for a little bit longer.
Well, here's the rule that we kind of keep, is that Sam is allowed, it's kind of like baseball. He can do 3 dad jokes, but the third one means he has to leave forever.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
I'm canceled from the show.
Yeah. And he's only done one so far.
You guys want to give a quick synopsis on what Worldforge pod is, what you guys do?
Should we? Yeah, I think I clearly can't be trusted with this. Piper, you should talk about what we do.
I'll take it away. So ours is, we refer to it as sort of like a comedy D&D creation podcast, in which every episode we have a different topic or theme, and we try to generate these things on the spot. And it can be anything from, we'll make a certain class of hero, like a bard or something from a game, but it can also be something like, oh, well, we want to create our own spaceship, or we're going to be making a new biome that people can interact with.
Yeah.
And it's just our way of kind of, doing something with all the crazy electricity that's going on in our brains all the time, and then also feeding it to you all as tasty treats.
We kind of like to say it's D&D adjacent, right?
Yeah.
Like we like to just make things for any kind of story you want to tell. We like to make heroes and villains and monsters, and it's sort of the nexus of improv and D&D and all of these different things. We just like to kind of have fun with it and play around with these ideas in a creative space.
Absolutely. And we recently had the pleasure of having 2 of you join us for a Creation Fest on our show as well, which was fabulous, by the way.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's us.
And so we thought that we would siphon some of that creativity and throw it into our multi-classes and, well, I guess everything else as well. So without further ado, our multi-class for this week is the Monk Artificer, or Artificer Monk. Kevin gets upset when I don't say them alphabetically.
It's very important.
So the Artificer is a half-caster that truly stands out as it's one of the few intelligence-based classes in 5th edition. Their focus is in creation through arcana, or just technology, whichever way you want to really take that. Whereas the Monk is a martial class known for doing awesome kicks. Their main focus is using ki, the magic drawn from inside themselves, to push past normal human limits. But even if they even look at a shield flirtatiously, then basically everything they know melts away. The multiclassing requirements for Monk are Wisdom and Dexterity, need 13. Multiclassing requirement for an Artificer is 13 in Intelligence. So let's go ahead and get some first thoughts on this. I am going to turn it to our guests. Let's go ahead and say, Sam, what are your first thoughts on this multiclass?
Well, so 2 things really stand out to me. One, I love the Artificer a lot. I think it's really cool that they basically just took all of the item creation feats from 3.5 and turned it into a class. I think that's a much more, that's a more interesting solution to me than the way that item creation worked in 3.5. I think it's really cool that we can have a class that's kind of dedicated to this. And I sort of see it as playing an Artificer is playing a character that similar to a monk, they kind of have this magical energy inherent inside of them, but they manifest it in a different way. Whereas a monk maybe manifests this internal magic in punches and kicks and, breathing fire and, imbuing their hands with lightning or purging poisons from their bodies. Artificers kind of imbue objects around them with this magic that lives inside of them. And I think that's a really, really, I think it makes sense as a combination. It might not at first seem like a really natural marriage of two things, but I think there's a lot of commonality between the monk and the artificer, kind of on a maybe a philosophical level there.
Yeah, and I think something that stands out to me about it is when I think about monks, I think about sort of like a Buddhist monk or something like that, like someone who gives up worldly possessions for the sake of a higher learning or pursuit. And so the idea that someone would surround themselves with material objects and also have these monk attributes, I think is really interesting.
Yeah. I was trying to think of examples of, I think monks are kind of, the hallmark of a monk is like discipline and devotion to a craft, right?
The 2 Ds.
Right. Exactly. The double Ds. All monks are double Ds. I think that template applies really well to an artificer, that there's sort of like a really intense focus on creation. And I was trying to think of cool examples of, things we'd be familiar with that kind of apply both these things. And what I kept coming back to is Santa Claus. Like the idea that Santa Claus is sort of like his entire focus is making toys to distribute to all the good children of all the world. And that's his singular focus in life. And that he imbues them with this sort of happy Christmas magical energy. And so to me, I think Santa Claus is the perfect example of an artificer monk that exists out there in the world.
Because everyone knows about how Santa's really good at kicking butt.
Yeah, obviously. How do you think he fights off the Krampus every Christmas?
Totally. Battle for the ages.
We have a seldom listened to Christmas episode when we first started recording. It has like the fewest listens of any episode we have. It's embarrassing. But we built Santa Claus. That was like the entire focus. He ended up being like a druid, rogue, paladin, and then something else multi-class. It got way out of hand.
Oh my God.
Cool. He's an everything man.
Yeah, it wasn't good. So how about Will? Will, you always got something negative to say. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's pretty garbage, man. What can I say? I don't know. I get where they're coming from. My position always, though, is that the monk has got that kind of singular devotion towards a direction, whereas the alchemist, I think, it may start at the same path, but it almost represents a fork from where it might have started doing push-ups and learning roundhouse kicks instead of learn, how to make grenades. So
instead of going to Shaolin school, I opened an Etsy shop. That's
the artificer.
With grenades.
Yeah.
I don't know what their terms of service are these days, but yeah.
Kevin, how about you? Oh, nope. Will, you still got more? Go for it.
Yeah, I think even mechanically, though, you're looking at a lot of things that don't line up that well, especially because like anything equipment related suddenly starts stepping on the monk's toes. So you do have to keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Kevin?
Role-playing wise, I agree with what everybody said, where in a sense, the artificer and monk kind of almost have the same goal to perfect themselves. In a sort of roundabout way, very, very clearly with the monk, and I would say artificer goes there too. But yeah, they go about it completely different ways, where the monk gathers strength from within and tries to perfect themselves without a need or reliance on anything else. Where the artificer says, no, fuck that. We have all this magic and items, and I'm going to use that to perfect myself. So I think it's going to be a challenge of how to kind of marry those together. In terms of mechanics, I really wanted to like this one. I can't. I'm hoping, as we start discussing this, we can, I've been proven wrong before based on my initial impressions here on things, and I'm hoping that's the case here, but I'm not really seeing much that works well together, mechanically speaking, with these guys.
Yeah, one of the issues is when you get a multi-class that has 3 stat requirements, once again, this being wisdom, dexterity, and intelligence, and one of those being a spellcasting modifier, and the other 2 dictating your armor class, it makes it very, very difficult to justify going into this. I think that there might be something we can do, but at the same time, we may just want to take the mechanics of this class and just kind of toss them out and just say, hey, it's probably not going to be great. I mean, if you're looking for a mechanically optimized class, then go play a rogue fighter. If you want something that's going to be fun, then I think there might be something here.
I think monks, in my experience, definitely are a class that kind of thrive on having like house rules or sort of homebrew accommodations, because they do require a very specific sort of build. They essentially they have 3 stats that are important to them, which is like a huge spread that you need to have to make an effective monk. To have wisdom, charisma, and dexterity as a monk, or you can argue that like wisdom, dexterity, constitution maybe would be good, or like strength. You need 3 stats to be good as a monk, essentially. And to add in an artificer and say we need intelligence also is a struggle. I think something that's kind of interesting is that the way that I've always had monks in my games, the way that I've played monks, the way that I've DM'd for monks, does involve a lot of kind of homebrew stuff. I kind of forget actually if there may have been a rule in 3.5, or it may have been something that we just made up to make monks a little more accessible in 3.5, but I thought there was an ability they got that allows them, they get basically the improvised weapon feat for free. It allows them to use, like random objects. It allows you to like replace your unarmed, the damage from an improvised weapon with your unarmed damage. But I could be wrong about that. That might be something we just did because we wanted all of our monks to feel like Jackie Chan.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, you could just pick up a mug or pick up a ladder or pick up whatever's lying around and use your unarmed damage, because that makes sense, I think, as a monk. And I think if we suspend our strict adherence to the rules a little bit, this cross class becomes much more viable. What I kept thinking of is, the artificer has the ability to imbue any mundane object with magic, right? So imagine you're a monk and you're in a bar fight and you pick up a mug to just smash somebody over the head with it. But before you hit him, you say, it'd be nice if this was magic. And now suddenly, instead of just being a mundane mug, it's a mug that you could use to smash a ghost in the face with because it has magical properties or something. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's definitely something to that. I think there is a way to marry these things together in an interesting way, but it might require a little bit of kind of outside the rules creativity.
So I think just a monk could get there raw, actually. Rules is written.
Yeah.
Because I'm pulling it up
6th
now.
level.
6th level, yeah. They're key empowered strikes. Their unarmed strikes get counted as magical. And there's no official rule saying their unarmed attacks, their unarmed damage die could be an improvised weapon. But just for the sake of flavor and description, there's no reason you can say instead of I punch them, I smash them with a mug. And you're still just rolled as if it's a monk martial arts unarmed attack.
It makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, and so that's what I was saying, that you could just do that as is. You don't even need a homebrew for that.
Yeah.
But then that still brings up the issue of, all right, so how do you fold the artificer into it? And every time we have monks come up, we say this again and again. We're going to sound like broken records, but monks are probably the hardest class to multi-class into or out of.
Aw, and you brought
because
us
they
on
just
to
benefit
do
from being
that.
a monk.
For sure.
Yay, not going easy on us. That's good.
No, I figured you guys were up to the challenge.
They certainly have the strictest kind of prerequisites of any class in D&D 5th edition. Like, you need to have, there's kind of like lore requirements for them, because you need to say like you're devoted in a certain way, and there are like hefty stat requirements and equipment based requirements. You can't just plug anything into that. They're not really a great modular class at all. I would 100% agree with that.
So with that, I don't think that from a role-playing perspective, these two can't work, though. I specifically really like the idea of a monastic order that recognizes to be human is imperfect. So to reach perfection, you kind of have to embrace technology.
Cool.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
So we're talking about like kind of like transhumanism, like cybernetic android kind of situations. That's a really cool, put a more sci-fi slant on it.
Definitely.
Right, but still mixing it with like the D&D fantasy. So it's just like this weird, sect out in the middle of nowhere that you just come to, and they just have like, little I guess, mechanical artillery just walking around, or, it's very common for people to just chop off their arms and put on mechanical arms because, this is a more perfect version of what we are, which is inherently flawed.
I
For
like
sure.
that. That's very cool.
I think that plays well if we look at like other systems. We look at like Shadowrun or something like that, where we have tech wizards or I can't think of what they're called in Shadowrun, where they have the bionic, like internet capable human bodies or whatever. What are they called? I can't think of it right now. But that the devotion that would be required and the dedication that would be required to sacrifice parts of your body for a certain goal, to say, I see something higher that I can achieve, and I will take this pain onto myself, to achieve this kind of higher goal.
It's making me think of a sort of reverse bicentennial man, that these people, like if you were really advanced in your practice, you would eventually replace all of you with mechanical and artificial things, if you're good enough.
Yeah.
And if you can stand it.
And that, of course, brings up the question of, like the hatchet question. If you replace the head of an axe and then the handle of the axe, like, is it still the same axe?
Exactly.
But,
Yeah, the
you
ship
as a
of
person.
Theseus paradox. Yeah.
Right.
At what point does it become a new thing? 100%.
Right. I would see. I can see with these guys that it would be something of like, well, the soul is still inside there. Like it's just a new shell. We got rid of our weak fleshy prison, and now we have this, perfect and powerful new form, but it's still our same consciousness.
Which feels very appropriate for a monk, I think.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about like some combinations. Does anyone have anything that they can think of that like, subclasses that would go together, or we'll start there. Subclasses that might work together.
So actually, I don't know about specifically subclass, just another kind of character concept here. The Witcher, I think actually might work as an Artificer monk.
Really?
Especially Alchemist. Yeah, Alchemist and then...
Of course, yeah.
Whatever, maybe Open Hand or something, or Kenzai probably, Alchemist Kenzai. Type monk, because a big part of, being a Witcher, and I didn't get huge into those games or novels or bit, but I know them and watched the Netflix series, and I know there's a lot to do with drinking potions and augmenting yourself.
That's how we get angry messages, Kevin. I don't know much about them, about the games or the books or the original source material, but I watched the Netflix show that came out recently.
No way. Stick to it. That's my route of approach too.
Yeah, and I said I don't know too much. I know a little bit when it comes to the lore and all that.
I think there's a really great nexus between the way of the drunken master. If the Witcher is like reliant on taking potions to augment their abilities, the drunken master is reliant on drinking alcohol to augment their abilities and give them sort of this like fluidity that you can't really have otherwise. That I think there's maybe a really cool kind of role play connection between those two things, to say our potions put us in a state that is elevated beyond what we can achieve, through normal consciousness. We craft this potion with our artificer abilities, and then when we drink it, our monk abilities kick in because it gives us this drunken master style of fighting. I think there's a really interesting crossover there. The Witcher connection, I think, is a brilliant sort of nexus of those things.
For sure.
So you mentioned the Kensai and the Alchemist. How do you see those two together?
Mechanically, not much. So the Alchemist big thing is
swords.
The Alchemist big thing is the experimental elixirs, which are nice. I have no problems with those as a standalone thing, but there's nothing about those really that's like excels by the person also being a monk. The experimental elixir is where after a long rest you get one. And it's random. You roll a d6, and these are stuff like it could be a healing one where whoever drinks it gets 2d4 plus your intelligence modifier, or swiftness increases your speed by 10 feet for 1 hour. Small effects like that, useful, but nothing too crazy. Or you could spend a spell slot to make more of them, and you could pick which effect you get, and you could drink them yourself, hand them out to the party, things like that. And again, it's like, so you have the alchemist now, they're a monk, and it's like these experimental elixirs are just kind of universally useful in a party for anyone. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's kind of nice for a monk to be able to do that themselves. But to dump 3 levels into a class and slow down the monk progressions for it, I don't know if it's worth it.
Yeah. I kind of feel like Way of the Kensai is basically just trying to turn a monk into a fighter. It just gives you all the proficiencies of a fighter. It lets you use different weapons, but it doesn't really keep up with that progression you have. I pulled up a website here just to kind of refresh myself, and it's a little sassy. Some of the descriptions of the abilities that Way of the Kensai gets are really funny to me. Way of the Brush, here it says, it gives you 1 proficiency in a tool which will probably never get used. It's very like sassy about the way this class functions and the subclass
Counter
functions.
to that, when you go Kensai and Artificer, that means that you can use your calligrapher supplies or painter supplies to cast spells. Because Artificers specifically use their tools to cast spells. That's their spellcasting focus. So I really like the idea of an Artificer who like basically paints in order to cast their spells. Either they have it like pre-painted, or maybe they just like, quickly scribble something on and then, hold up the scroll and boom, out comes the spell.
Yeah.
Wasn't this the plot of Epic Mickey?
Epic Mickey.
Wow, what a throwback.
You were like evil Mickey Mouse and you like beat stuff with a paintbrush.
Yeah.
No, Will, this was taken from a much cooler idea, and that is Sai from Naruto.
That's a much less cool idea. That's a much just dorkier thing. Stop.
I think Epic Mickey is so funny because it's clearly a product of a post Kingdom Hearts world, which is like so wild that they're like, what if Disney was edgy and cool, which no one has ever thought about before Kingdom Hearts,
or even asked for.
Exactly,
yeah, right?
No one needed or wanted. I do think though there's definitely something there though. Like I think it's not a huge leap mechanically to say, we talk about like, spell scroll creation as a wizard or a sorcerer or something like that. If we were able to look at a Kensai monk as someone who can essentially use calligraphy to craft a scroll of fireball, basically, they can do essentially the exact same thing, but just kind of from a different starting point. I think there's fertile ground there maybe to explore a lot of interesting concepts.
Definitely. And so what I've been thinking of is, it seems like we're all really focused on this Kensai, which is fine. I also went down the Kensai path. I like the idea of a Kensai artillerist. So the first thing that comes to mind with that is just the fact that a lot of these class features rely on bonus actions. The artillerist, they specifically get some little cannons that they can make, either flamethrower cannons or ballistas, or one that just grants temporary hit points. But I specifically like the ballista turrets, which I think I might be getting the wrong name of. I'm going to pull that up because that's going to bother me. The Eldritch Cannon, yes, the Eldritch Cannon, and they get the Force Ballista. So that actually is comparable to what the monk normally gets for their bonus action. Usually a monk is going to use their bonus action to either flurry of blows if they want to spend the key point, or they're just going to make a simple unarmed attack. The unarmed attack for monks isn't too impressive damage-wise. It starts off at 1d4 until level 6, level 5, where it becomes 1d6, goes up to 1d8, 1d10, 1d12 as they progress. But the Force Ballista starts off at 2d8 damage and only takes your bonus action to use. So I could very often see having this monk artificer multiclass and relying on your Force Ballista to get that damage, because that's a thing that you can just set up in the back of the battlefield and it just keeps shooting out. And unless you're like Way of the Open Hand, where your flurry of blows is going for more than just damage, the Force Ballista is actually going to win out basically every single time.
Yeah.
So I could see that as being one big reason to go into this, as well as, get your infusions, which means you can make yourself have a +1 staff for your normal attacks, or you can have what other infusions? All the other infusions. There's a bunch of good infusions.
Yeah. I think that is one of the things with Monk that stands out the most to me is, like, at level 1, you can potentially get 3 attacks in a single round. Like, you get a free extra attack as a bonus action, and if you use a key point, you can get 2 attacks as a bonus action.
Level 2,
like,
actually. Minor correction.
It's level 2? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. No. An important correction. But it's also strange to me that how do you balance the whole point of a monk is that you get to hit him a bunch of times, right? You just get to hit a lot. That's kind of the idea behind a monk is what if many punches? And how you kind of reconcile that with the fact that at level 1, all of your punches, your fists are supposed to be the equivalent of attacking with a sword or a spear or an axe or whatever, but you only get a half a d6 of damage or a d4 of damage or whatever. I think that's something that is kind of a drawback of the monk is the fact that at level 1, they don't automatically get an unarmed strike that's equal to 1d6 as a minimum of damage. I think is something the monk kind of needs. I think historically in 3.0 and 3.5, monks always were really, really weak in the early levels. And then by the time you got to level 10 or so, they become the most overpowered broken class in the game because they get all of these insane abilities that augment their fighting. There needs to be a more gradual curve, I think, with monks. That you should have a little bit more at low levels and a little bit less at high levels is kind of how I feel about them.
Well, if you're talking about what you think is a potential flaw in this one class, couldn't you use elements of the other class to kind of fill in the blanks and improve that flaw?
Maybe.
Yeah, and I could see, again, kind of using the Artificer infusions and that Force Ballista from the Artillerist to kind of take over where, before you're talking about how the unarmed strikes really aren't that worth it. Great, go ahead and use your Force Ballista that does 2d8. Or, your weapons aren't anything special. Or it takes until level 6 to get magical attacks. Well, 2 levels into Artificer and you've got yourself a magical staff.
Yeah. Exactly. You can turn you find a grail, the cup of a carpenter lying around in a bar, and you turn it into a magical weapon that you can bash somebody over the head with as a monk. Whatever you want to do. Yeah.
So I think some of the infusions could be maybe not the greatest though, unfortunately, with this. There's a lot that go on armor or shields, which obviously isn't going to work at all. And then you do have stuff where you can infuse simple weapons and things which you can use as a monk weapon, but until level 5 they're only getting 1 attack anyways. The bonus unarmed attack and stuff are not going to benefit at all from the infusions. Flurry of blows, you can't use infusions on that or anything. And then, not to continue being a downer here, but I have to wonder with the Artillerist, if you're going Artillerist to get the Force Ballista to get the 2d8 bonus damage, why even go monk? Because one of the big benefits of monk is getting your extra unarmed attack and being able to flurry of blows, and then you're chasing down 3 levels in another class to replace it.
Great question, Kevin. I have an answer. So the Force Ballista on the surface sounds absolutely amazing, but at the end of the day, you really don't get that many uses of it. The Artillerist gets 1 of these Eldritch Cannons for free per day, and then after that, they have to start using spell slots in order to call this thing back. So if you have the monk, then it's not going to put you again as the best of both worlds, but it puts you in either space as still competitive. And I also really like the idea of the big bad evil guy kind of taunting you. It's like, oh, you're nothing without all of your trinkets. The Force Ballast is done, and all of your other Artificer stuff is just off. And it's like, no, I'm still kind of a badass, and you can just go into this sword slinging. Face punching, roundhouse kicking type of badass that is unhindered by the fact that their Force Ballista is missing. And I know, from a mechanical standpoint, no, it's not as good as just going into full monk or full Artillerist, but it sounds pretty cool, and that's all I got.
It does until you look at it really though. Oh, I'm not just an Artillerist. I'm also an extremely underleveled monk.
Well, it's all about how you role played in the moment, and if you're lucky enough to get some good roles in it too. Because I can easily see, if you were lucky and you got all of the roles that you wanted, you could do a whole this isn't even my final form kind of a thing, and be like, you thought I was just a nerd who likes playing with toys. Well, guess what? I also work out in my free time.
Yeah. For sure. It's like we sort of said, I think a really good monk class is really dependent on how much leeway your DM is willing to give you, because you can do a lot of sort of rules lawyering with a monk. Having the opportunity at level 2, not level 1, to do 3 attacks easily means you have 3 opportunities to hit someone, you know? Like every time you hit someone, you have the opportunity to justify why you can do a buttload of damage, you know, because of your combined Artificer and Monk abilities. Like there's just, if we're just talking about just the math of it, like 3 attacks is going to be better than 2 attacks or 1 attack, no matter what is behind those rolls or behind those attacks. Like there's a lot there.
Definitely.
Yeah, more than 1 attack's always beneficial. More chances to hit if you're not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, for sure.
So with this Artificer, are you thinking just 3 levels, probably?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think that you're going to get much benefit from going into 5 levels into Artificer, because then you get into the bonuses to cantrips. And honestly,
Right.
I wouldn't touch that. You might want to go 4 for the ability score increase. That's just dependent on, I guess, what you're feeling is lacking. And because of the, just inherent nature of multi-classes, you have so few ability score increases in the first place. So I could see going up to 4. It's not going to help your spell casting too much. You're still only going to have 3 level 1 spells that might honestly go entirely into stuff like casting shield or bringing back your artillery. Kind of up to you how you want to play that. 3 level 1 spells is definitely not the most amazing reason to go into a class.
No, actually, wouldn't it just be 2? If you go 4 levels into it, don't you take half of it, round it up, and
4 levels into Artificer?
Take it up with your DM, is what I would say.
There's specific rules for it. I'm pretty sure you get 2.
No, if you go 4 levels into Artificer, you still get the 3 first level spell slots. This is half the show is looking up rules.
Sorry, yeah.
Well, so Monk gets extra attack at level 5. So you get the opportunity to make a second attack at level 5. You still have your ability to make a second bonus attack by expending a key point. So at level 5, you can make 4 attacks as a Monk already.
Correct.
Regardless of what else you have going on. So like, I think in a 5th edition world where we've taken away the idea that every class gets to make 4 attacks at level 20, that's like a huge commodity to say at level 5 we get 4 attacks as a Monk using whatever abilities are granted to us by whatever other class we have available. You know, maybe you're actually level 8 because you have 5 levels in Monk and 3 in Artificer or whatever. Like there's a commitment there, certainly. But the fact that you can make 4 attacks in one round is a much bigger deal in 5th edition D&D than it is in 3.5 or 4e.
Definitely. You just need to keep in mind it is limited to your key.
Yeah.
So at level 5,
certainly.
you can do it 5 times.
But you also get stuff where you can replenish your key by doing... I don't have the rules in front of me. I know you can replenish your key. You can
There's
sleep. You can
not
sleep all
too
day.
much. I think short rest will always bring it back.
Yeah.
In terms of monks, there's until really, really later on, there's not much else that replenishes it in the middle of the day other than a short rest.
Yeah, which is always kind of a huge limiter of the class. I mean, the fact that you get them back on a short rest is pretty big. I mean, talking about at level 5, you're going to use some flurry of blows. At that point, you get stunning strike, which is a huge, huge reason to go into Monk, is the ability to just shut somebody down for an entire round. I mean, I absolutely love Stunning Strike. I think that is, if anything, one of the big reasons to go into Monk. So I think actually that actually lends more credit to the Monk Artificer, is because if you're using that bonus action for, again, this Force Ballista or literally anything else, then you don't have to worry about using Flurry of Blows, because you can just spend all of your key points on those stunning strikes and get a lot more value out of it, and almost have to fight less with how you spend your key points.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I kind of picturing the Artificer Monk running up, stunning strike, and while they are stunned, commanding their Force Ballista to fire from the back.
Right.
In which you get advantage on that attack.
Yeah. So that sounds pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
I can't get over, I think there's a lot that's really interesting about building a thing that attacks in the same way a monk does. To say my artificer abilities are informed by the fact that as a monk, I can attack 4 times in a turn. Like, why can't I build a thing that attacks in the same way I can? Like, again, it's all really dependent on what your DM allows. If you can justify and lawyer something up in the way your DM agrees is acceptable to the rules,
Right.
why can't I build a machine that attacks in exactly the same way I, as a monk, am trained to attack?
Right.
Like, I think there's room there for some kind of like weird rules lawyering kind of chicanery.
It makes me, okay, what you just talked about kind of made me think of a scenario, which I think would be kind of cool. And I'm taking a lot of inspiration from what you just said. And then also, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Real Steel, in which Hugh Jackman has a boxing robot. But there's a point in the movie when the robot, like, it gets so beat up, the controls that they have to control it don't work anymore. But the robot has a shadow boxing feature where if it can see what you're doing, it will mimic your punches. Yeah. And so that would even be a cool thing too. And again, DM says whether or not you can do this. But if this monk artificer built essentially kind of like a shadow golem, I guess, sort of out of whatever tech or supplies it has, and therefore it's there by its side, like mimicking its moves and, punching and fighting alongside it. That would be some way you could possibly combine these things too.
Absolutely.
For the record, I want everybody to know the Real Steel movie was quite literally pitched as the Rock'em Sock'em Robots movie.
Yes, exactly. Because who doesn't want to pay to see that?
Certainly. Hugh
It
Jackman
made $300 million, so I guess I'm out of touch, guys. But I like this idea. But it, once again, this is totally, you're in the realm of homebrew. But if you look at the Eldritch Canon table, there's no reason that has to be 3 items long. This is the perfect place to add more items. And a Rock'em Sock'em Robot, I think, is a great addition to that.
Thank you.
And anybody who has ever played a warlock knows if you put Eldritch in the name, it becomes overpowered.
Oh, yes.
Broken. You can break anything by putting Eldritch in the name of it.
So for your Rock'em Sock'em Robot Artificer Monk, definitely looking at the Battlesmith.
Oh, yeah.
For sure,
oh, cool.
For sure.
We should probably, talk about that.
For sure.
First, just raw as is, and then we can make it a Rock'em Sock'em Robot, I guess. But so the Battlesmith is one where this is the melee Artificer. They're up in melee and all that. They make a Steel Defender, which is a permanent robotic companion that fights alongside them and helps deflect attacks and stuff like that.
Boom.
And this is perfect.
Initially with multiclassing with the monk, it seems like, that would mechanically work out really well. Of course, you're called Battlesmith Monk. But I still feel like it's not going to work out that great. Just mechanically raw. One of the big things is battle ready. So the Battlesmith is able to use their intelligence modifier for attack and damage rolls when using a magic weapon. Which at first seems like, it might be nice because you just focus on intelligence and not have to worry about dex. But you still need the dex up there to multi-class. And it's only when with that magic weapon. So unarmed attacks and stuff like that don't benefit from it. So it's half your attacks are intelligence, the other half is dex, and I feel like that's getting really murky and
also
hard to keep up with.
Just to step in, the dexterity is also important, once again, because of your armor class. Even though Battlesmith gets you proficiency in heavy armor, if you, once again, even look at that or think about looking at it as a monk, you're dead. You die.
For sure. It's really hard with this multi-class dividing your stat block between 4 different stats. Mm-hmm. It, like, whether you focus on strength or dex, you still have to deal with charisma, wisdom, intelligence, probably constitution, and then whatever your basic like melee stat is, if it's strength or dex. Like,
where are you getting charisma from?
What am I getting charisma from?
I don't know.
Do monks not benefit?
Yeah, I don't think
from
monks
charisma?
monks don't need charisma.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
Not in 5th edition.
Well, I'm thinking about like the monks at the airport who try to get you to donate to the to get you to give money to them. They need charisma to convince you to give them like coin.
Oh
Good
yeah, so
save.
then they're all actually
Yeah.
lacking.
I'll take that. I'll give you a points for that.
Thank you. Regardless, what I'm trying to say is your stats are divided between a lot of. You have a lot of dump stats you need.
Right.
It's not like you can focus on one or two different things. You need at least like 3 or 4 different stats that are important to you. Like that's, I think, kind of the toughest thing about this is that you can't specialize as easily as you can with other multi-class. There's not a really good like overlap between these stats.
I could still see going into the Battlesmith just for the Steel Defender, and then, you don't have to raise your intelligence too high. If you're only taking a small dip into Artificer, then you can stop at 13 or 14 and then just kind of ignore the intelligence modifier. Just don't cast spells that really rely on intelligence. And then you're getting this Steel Defender, which is really cool. You can use your bonus action to make attacks with you. Again, that Rock'em Sock'em Robot idea.
Yeah.
Or it's still using its reaction. Its deflect attack is super good, and it just gets this reaction. It doesn't take up yours. But the Defender imposes disadvantage on the attack roll of one creature it can see that is within 5 feet of it, provided the attack roll is against a creature other than the Defender. So, I mean, that's just great utility where you send this thing up in the mix. You're not as concerned about it because it's not your health points. And, it can do some damage. It can take some hits, not a ton. It's probably not going to last forever by any means, but it's worthwhile at least, even just for that reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just be worried about really out leveling it. The deflect attack reaction is of course nice, and that's going to universally be useful. But as you get higher and higher, its hit points is your Constitution modifier plus your Intelligence modifier plus 5 times your level in the class. So your Artificer level is kind of the main driver to this thing's hit points. And if you stop it at level 3, it's probably not going to ever have above 20 hit points. But it's something you want to send in to the fray and take hits and tank and give disadvantage.
It just takes the dodge action every turn.
True. It's a great demonstration.
Can't do that on its
I
own?
think of the fact that Dungeons and Dragons is not like multi-classing is kind of like a secondary thing in Dungeons and Dragons. Like no D&D class is designed to be like, what if we multi-class this? Like I think that's kind of a weak point of D&D is that we obviously have the ability to multi-class, but no class in D&D is designed to accommodate doing that. Like we really need a little bit more I don't know, like that synergy doesn't really exist in rules as written. Like I think there needs to be a little bit more room to work with. If Wizards of the Coast cared more about people finding weird combinations of this, there'd be some really, really cool ground there. But we have to find space for this to work ourselves as players. Like there isn't really a lot in the actual rules as they are written to accommodate these kinds of things. And I think that's a good kind of illustration of that.
So I'm gonna have to disagree with you there.
Really?
There's a lot of classes that work beautifully together, and it's accommodated by the multi-class rules, and they can make each other better or realize different concepts and playstyles that you couldn't with any individual class. But yes, of course, there are some duds.
Yeah.
Such as the Artificer Monk. But just because there are some duds, I wouldn't say it's a failing of the D&D system. They're just very different classes altogether they just don't synergize well.
Maybe I'm still living in like the 3.5, 3.0 world where if you wanted to multi-class, it was like, hey, be prepared to give up half of the abilities that your class has, and also you're going to get half of the experience and everything that you expected to gain, just like kind of throw it out the window. Like you're going to lose a lot. They're like very specific. If you're a paladin, you want a half class, you lose all your paladin abilities. If you want to be a monk in half class, you lose all your monk abilities. Like there are a lot of weird, like specific class-based rules in 3.5 that made multi-classing really, really hard. And that's kind of where I came up a little bit. So
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair. I played Will and I both played a little bit of 3.5. That was our first introduction, but never got into it enough to look at a multi-class or anything, so I can't talk on that. But definitely in 5th edition, I think they fixed all of that.
Except for with the monk. I do still love the idea of the big book of multi-classes where it just takes, all of the kind of meh mechanically but cool role-playing ones and just makes mechanics for them. It's just like, yeah, okay, so the monk kind of sucks with its artificer, but what if it did work? What if it was a good balanced class that still had the flavor of both of them? So look out for that in 2021. That's what we're taking on.
I do think it'd be nice to. So we've talked about this on our show a couple times. So one of my favorite games of all time is Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, and how I think they do a really, really good job of it. It runs on a very similar system of Final Fantasy IX, right? Where every class you have, they have different weapons they can equip, and based on the weapons you equip, you learn different abilities. And you can kind of choose, you get abilities from 2 classes at a time, and you can decide what combinations you think are most effective, and they go really far out of their way to give you control over what classes you want to combine. You can combine a fighter and a white mage, or you can combine a black mage and a red mage, and there's always really interesting synergy between all these classes. Like, I think that it would be really nice if there was some type of supplement in D&D that said, we're going to find synergies and kind of benefits to all of these different classes, and say, well, as a red mage, you can find a way to cast 2 spells per turn, and if you combine that with a black mage, that means you can do Fireball, the most powerful spell that anyone has ever heard of, twice in one turn. Or you can cast Eldritch Blast twice in one turn if you combine it with a Warlock. Like, I think it would be interesting to see an exploration of multi-class in a first-party supplement. So I guess what I'm saying is, Wizards of the Coast, if you're not cowards, please come and do this.
And they are cowards.
Obviously. Yeah.
I can mostly say that because I know that no one from Wizards of the Coast listens to this show, and if you do, I'm sorry. I really love the work you do. I understand there's a lot of things, a lot of concepts you want to realize. Yeah. There's only so much time in a day, and please sponsor us.
And we're all over here, and we're like, we want everything right now.
For sure.
Do it.
Crawford's going to start sending us like DCMAs, just frivolous ones to take us down. Those guys didn't like my multi-classing system.
I should have gone and played Final Fantasy Tactics Advance.
Oh, damn it. All right, so back to this actual class, this monk artificer. So trying to think of like a character concept to realize, I want to stick with that idea that I originally mentioned, the idea of like a monastic order that specifically focuses on technology, and what would really drive one of those monks to not just leave their order, but also to just like go out out for adventure. Like what would drive them out of their community to seek more? Because I feel like a lot of that comes from internal study. Like how do we figure out this technology? How do I figure out the inner peace within myself and everything there? The hardest thing for me to get over was just like, so why would they ever leave? What benefit would there be?
Yeah.
Well, maybe they've gotten to a point where they can't really advance further with what's available where they're at. Maybe they say to themselves, if we only had more of this resource or something like that, and they have to go out and find that thing.
Yeah. Their monastic focus is fueled by the spice must flow, like in Dune or something. There's some kind of like resource that gives them the ability to focus in the way that they would like to. Or maybe it's a thing where the world has kind of left them behind. Maybe they are sort of the old guard. They have this monastic tradition that is not tied to the modern technology and like modern sensibilities, and the world around them is advancing in a way that they don't really accommodate for, and they have to adapt to that in an interesting way. So you would take on the Artificer class as a way of saying, okay, we can connect to the new world. The monk traditions are kind of combat and like physical fighting philosophy, but we still have a way of viewing the world through this lens of like modernity that the Artificer class gives us. We can say there's smartphones and whatever's out there, whatever whatever tinkerers or whatever artificers are building. The Artificers give the monk a little bit of a lens into the modern world. That might be kind of interesting.
This is making me think about that thing about how in Amish communities you're allowed to go spend a year.
Yeah,
Rumspringa.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, all right, go see what the real world is like. And they're like, wow, we're in New York City.
Yeah, for sure.
Then you
So
come
maybe
back
that's
with
what's going
robot
on.
arms.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, this is me now, family.
Absolutely.
Get used to it.
So I like that. I also like the idea of like this monastic order really, kind of glorifies the technology aspects, and they view it as like this very sacred knowledge. But the rest of the world, as you said, has kind of surpassed them, and they've, in a way, from the monks order, have kind of bastardized the technology and like just turned it into solving every single small problem in the world. So then you get this young monk who is going out into the world and kind of has to deal with the realization that not everyone views technology in the way that they do.
Yeah, they have this expectation and this vision of what it would be like to be a monk in this order, and maybe the actual experience being a part of this monastic tradition isn't what they thought it would be, and they're saying, I want to reconnect to the old ways, but at the same time there's this like pull from the future, trying to
I want robot
adapt
arms
to the new stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're sort of situated in the middle of these two different philosophies that are both equally valid. I think there's, we kind of said from the start of this, I think talking about the role play considerations, that's much more interesting than the mechanical considerations of this class combination.
Sadly, yes.
But we cover both, so.
Mechanically, no. I mean, this is basically garbage. Say the one that really,
It really is. I mean, I totally get have a character concept to have a blast role-playing it. Perfectly fine. Just understand mechanically you're probably better being an artificer or just being a monk.
Yeah. Just get a good DM, a DM who's willing to play ball. That's what you need, is a DM who wants to deal with all of your weird recommendations and requests as a monk artificer. You need something like that for this combination to work well.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other like miscellaneous ideas I came up with. Say, I think the only one that really came out and shined, in my opinion, was just the again that force ballista. It does work out well with Kensai. I don't think it works well with any other subclass. The only other one that you guys kind of mentioned earlier, which is like making your Eldritch Cannon to mirror what you do, is completely throwing away any mechanical viability and is going way of the four elements. If you do Way of the Four Elements, then you kind of get that like, breathing fire aspect. And then you get the flamethrower Eldritch Cannon. Another kind of cool idea, but Way of the Four Elements is a mistake. I don't like that.
It's a great way to lower expectations. You come to the table, you're like, don't worry, guys, I'm a Way of the Four Elements. It's like, oh, he's garbage anyways. He can multiclass however he wants. You just balance
It's a
the
big
party
kind
around.
of red alert to the
one less.
DMs. All right, let me lower the challenge rating and everything.
And that is honestly a consideration, because at the end of the day, the game is as hard as your DM makes it. So if you have somebody who really, really wants to go Way of the Four Elements and they want to go into the artillerist artificer, the DM can see that and go, okay, I'm basically balancing this against 3 characters or 2, 3.5, whatever. And it's going to be fine, to be completely honest. Just in the same way that right now we have a bunch of characters in our campaign that are very mechanically viable and absolutely blow the fuck out any standard challenge rating. I continue to pump up that difficulty, and there's only been one almost TPK. So it's just a matter of you have a lot of freedom as a DM to tweak that around. So if somebody really does want to do this, you really can, and I don't think that should stop you. The fact that it's bad, just accept that you're going to be. Yeah. People are going to have to carry your weight.
Is this a thing you encounter on this show a lot where you're like, this sucks, but what if you had a good DM?
It's surprisingly not that much. We could usually find something that works for most combinations. This one's really a dud.
I mean, I do like the Witcher approach to it, where if you frame artificing more as like crafting potions that fit in a little bit more with, the different elements, or with the... I don't know, like the disciplines, enhancing the abilities you get as a monk through your artificer abilities. Like, I think there is outside of the rules synergy that can exist there. But again, it all is based on going outside of the rules. You have to find somebody who is willing to say, yeah, all right, that makes sense. The rules don't accommodate or give us space for this, but it doesn't really say you can't. There's nothing in the handbook that says dogs can't play basketball, right? Like, that's kind of how it has to work with this class.
I don't actually think that's true, though. I think they do have specific rules about dogs playing basketball. I don't want to be that guy, but like, it wouldn't have flown.
Probably not.
Page 234 of the DMG.
No, but he
actually.
dribbles a bit.
Yeah, for sure.
No, dogs can't dribble. I think that is well established.
Yeah, it's always a walk.
Yeah.
You son of a bitch.
But boy, does he look cute in those little doggy shoes.
It's true.
All right, so I think that is enough ranting about how bad the Monk Artificer is mechanically. Does anyone have any closing thoughts on this that they want to express? Any concepts that they've been too shy to bring out this entire time?
I mean, we talked about The Witcher and Santa Claus, and I think those are the two most important things we could possibly explore with this. So.
Exactly, and I got to mention Rock'em Sock'em Steelbots, so I'm satisfied.
Honestly, I'm pretty happy with that one. That's a good addition to this.
I do like the idea of, thematically, I think it's interesting that there is a class that can say, look, I can only use very specific types of weapons, right? I have limited ability based on class restrictions. I can't use a shield, I can't use armor or whatever. I can only use certain ways of attacking, but having the ability to build something that fits within those restrictions, to say I'm a tinkerer. I can make a club that has magical energy beyond what a normal club would be. I think there is some really interesting kind of role play potential there, but I would completely agree that as the rules are written mechanically, there's not a lot of really great connection between these two things. I think you need to find ways to fit this into your particular campaign and find ways to contextually make this make sense.
Definitely.
Yeah, totally fair. Kevin, I hear you breathing. Okay.
Cool.
Right.
We know you're not dead.
Well, I wasn't sure. You seemed like you had something else to say.
Well, I was inhaling to speak, and I was just going to say, cool. Well, I think that's probably everything with Artificer Monk.
I just had a thought. Our Jedis are Artificer monks, right? Jedis are monks, and then you build a lightsaber. That's an Artificer monk. Yeah.
No Star Wars in my D&D.
Sorry, but yes.
I think my biggest issue with that is like it totally doesn't work with any like force powers. Like they're not there, and it's like, what the hell is this thing?
Well, you could maybe argue that Anakin was one because he liked to build robots and pod racers.
Exactly, man.
We just watched Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
Never mind.
I'm so sorry, but could you not ruin it for us too?
We just like dragging everyone down to our level.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let's go ahead and put a cap on that for the Monk Artificer.
Please do.
A cool role-playing class, but probably not the best mechanically. And with that, before we get to our Monster of the Week, want to have our promotional minute. First thing is that this episode was sponsored by Scabbard RPG Campaign Manager and World Building Tool. I know it's a 2-in-1. It can manage your campaigns and your world building. I have been using Scabbard for the past year or so to manage my campaigns, and I cannot explain enough just how useful it is in order to get all of my random thoughts in a row. As I'm listening to World Forge Pod, just lets me just throw any of those great things in. Yeah, I combined them. So it really helps even the most disorganized DM put together a well fleshed out world. I think one of the best moments I've had using Scabbard is when I myself as the DM am in the middle of play and one of the player characters can just pull up information and just tell me stuff that I wrote about my own world months and months ago. So they're like, oh yeah, the bartender's name? Yeah, we've got it right here. So absolutely love Scabbard, cannot recommend it enough. They recently added a proper noun detector, so when you save a note of any kind, it scans the text and alerts you for any proper nouns in case you want to track or expand on those. Right now, our listeners can get an extra month plus 10% off a hero subscription if you go to scabbard.com/monsters, and that is Scabbard with 1B. If you'd like to find us, you can find our social media on Twitter. That's Monsters_Multi, or you can go to our subreddit, which is our Monsters and Multiclass, and you can find our podcast literally wherever you get yours. Obviously, you already found it. You made it this far into the show. Our friends at WorldForge, where can we find you?
You can find us on Twitter at WorldForgePod. If you want to send us any feedback about our just benign shenanigans, the dumb nonsense that we talk about, we love to hear it there. If you have anything that does not fit into 240 characters, you can send us a message at worldforgepod@gmail.com. We would love to hear any fan fiction or fan art or fan mail or anything you want to send us. Is always really exciting. But the biggest one is WorldForgePod on Twitter is the best way to get in contact.
Yes. And definitely check them out. Say they have a fantastic podcast that just goes really deep into world building. It's a lot more, this might be overblowing it, but cerebral than our show, where we definitely talk about hardcore rules and, very stick in line. They just blow that wide open every time, and it's a joy to listen to. So please do check them out.
Aw, thank you.
Thank you.
So without further ado, let's get to our monster of the week, which is going to be the Shadow.
This episode's monster is the Shadow. The Shadow is an undead, shadow-like creature that follows particularly good things, aiming to sap their strength. They, quite frankly, do resemble a shadow in every way, shape, and form, and have stats to match. So let's get into it. The Shadow.
So I think this is officially our lowest challenge rating monster that we did as a standalone thing. It's only challenge rating 1/2. We definitely covered low challenge rating monsters like this, but they're always part of a larger discussion because they're like part of big groups or something. Despite that, I think there's actually a decent amount to discuss here.
Yeah, the Shadow comes up a lot as one of the more dangerous low challenge rating enemies. And so I think because of that, there's some finesse you have to have as a DM if you're going to throw this at your party.
For sure. So 16 hit points and 12 armor class, so nothing too crazy there, but it has resistance to all non-magical attacks, and in addition, the resistance to acid, cold, fire, lightning, thunder damage, which for like a challenge rating 1/2 is crazy. I don't think you ever really see that.
Yeah. I mean, also they have dark vision, but like, welcome to the club, right? It's 5e. If you don't have dark vision, what are you doing?
Right. And then condition immunities, exhaustion, frightened, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, poison, prone. Yeah.
For being not even level 1, technically, that is like a pretty impressive array of abilities.
Yeah, how obnoxious.
Right. Yeah. And then amorphous, so they could squeeze through anything that's 1 inch, or they can move through anything that's 1 inch that's not squeezing. They could take hide as a bonus action in dim light or darkness, but in sunlight they do have disadvantage on just about everything. And they have exactly just 1 attack, but it's kind of scary for such a low level. Strength drain. It's +4 to hit, reach of 5 feet, does 2d6 + 2 necrotic damage, and it reduces the target's strength 4 by 1d4. and they die if it reaches 0.
Wow.
Yeah, for being a low-level enemy, facing a party that doesn't have any kind of like ability restoration magic at this point, like that's incredibly potent. You don't have a way to counteract that. It's very different than a bandit swinging a sword at you. That they may only do like 3 damage, but instead of doing damage to your hit points, they're doing much more permanent damage because they're attacking your stat scores, your abilities.
Right. The one benefit is that it only has a +4 to attack, which isn't even that high, even for a 1/2 challenge rating. Its damage, though, is still pretty high by itself. 2d6 plus 2 damage. I mean, if you're trying to throw this at a level 2 party, even if the strength drain doesn't kill whatever PC you're throwing this at, the damage just might.
Yeah.
But still, if you're looking at a PC with 8 strength, this can very easily 2-shot any player character, and that's rough. I mean, and the worst part of it all is that if you're reduced to 0 strength in this way, Revivify is not going to cut it, because if you get Revivified, you don't get your 1 strength back. You're still dead. Yeah. So you need somebody to have a greater restoration, and you need to have Revivify. And
if you can even find someone with Revivify level 1,
right?
Yeah.
Right. So at a low level, I mean, your best bet here is going to be somebody has something like, Gentle Repose, which is a cantrip that basically just lets, or is it a cantrip or a level 1 spell? Will?
That's a level 1
okay,
spell.
Thank you.
No, I think that's a level 2 spell or something.
Okay. Well, all right. Gentle Repose, either way. If you've got Gentle Repose around, then you can at least preserve the body for like a week, which means you can mad scramble to a cleric to be like, hey, our friend got fucked up. Fix him. But otherwise, I mean, it's really rough. You're very easily looking at an actual kill on a player character, and I just don't think you see anything like this in 5th edition.
Yeah. I agree. I think if we want to be really honest, your best bet isn't going to be to try and find someone with Revivify and deal with like Gentle Repose shenanigans. Your best bet is to let them die and roll a new character.
Right.
I think that's a much more appropriate reaction to this.
I feel like it'd be really embarrassing if you die and your character goes to character heaven and they're like, what gotcha? And you're like, a shadow?
Yeah. Like, I mean, I kind of get it, but also like, what if you were a little less lame?
Weenie Holla Juniors.
Yes,
Exactly. Hello, shaved head. That's a haircut.
Did you put milk in your bowl of nails this morning?
So what's kind of
The real
disappointing, though,
questions.
about how easy it is to just like perma-die from this thing is that one of the things that's mentioned is if you die from your strength getting drained and you're just completely dead, then a new shadow creature rises from the corpse 1d4 hours later. Now, if your character, or if whatever, that person is revived after that shadow is formed, then you don't have a shadow. And that's really interesting, but the idea of that actually
cool.
happening is very difficult because of what we just discussed. The fact that you have to have greater restoration, and it has to be hours later, which usually doesn't work unless we're using some type of crazy revive magic. But I love the concept of that as you get brought back to life and your shadow's missing.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I could see that being a really interesting starting point for a campaign. Like say before we start playing, right? A character dies and their parents are like super rich nobles and they say, we'll do anything to bring them back to life. But they're just too late. They were killed by a shadow, but they couldn't revive them before that, 1d4 hours passed or whatever. When they finally revive them, there's this shadow, this kind of mirror of them out there in the world that maybe is growing in strength in parallel with this character. If this is a member of the party that now is just going on this adventure, every time they level up, maybe the shadow levels up too. There's some connection between them, some kind of like quantum entanglement. I think that would be a really, really interesting sort of kind of behind the scenes shadowy rival to have in your campaign that's just always sort of back there.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of narrative potentials. I also think if your character survived this and they have no shadow, that's something that could automatically make very observant people wary of them.
Yeah.
If you notice someone doesn't have a shadow, I think you would that would put off red flags for me to be like, okay, what is this person?
Do you assume they're a vampire?
Right, they must be something untrustworthy about them.
I mean, if that happened in real life, I'd go straight into throwing hands.
You would, if you saw
totally
somebody
just
with
get over
no
it, 'cause,
shadow,
I mean-
you would just punch them right out.
I don't judge people based off things they can't control, man. If you were born without a shadow, that doesn't make you any less of a person to me.
I would generally assume someone without a shadow could fuck me up.
Right? I'd be like, ooh, that's like a demon or something. I'm not touching that.
I don't want to punch no Babadook, okay?
Yeah.
Babadook
All right,
punches
that's fair.
back.
I think one thing we did not mention, though, and this is one of those things that you will see sometimes when something seems very, very powerful like this, there's always the but. And the but here is it's vulnerable to radiant damage.
Oh, okay. Which is something
So,
that clerics and paladins have access to very early on at very low levels.
Exactly. If you've got a cleric in
Right.
your party, this thing, its challenge rating effectively just like disappears in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And just, blow it up with a giant call from the gods, and your shadow's gone.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Because it does kind of feel like you could just be like, light, and that might help.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, and to talk on the official lore a bit of this. So their goal is to feed on living creatures' vitality. And they're specifically drawn to good-natured people. The specific wording, so a creature that lives a life of goodness and piety.
Piety?
Is that
That's
piety,
that's
right?
when you use
Piety.
I'm
a lot
pretty
of
sure it's
pies,
piety.
right?
It's piety. Yeah, piety.
Yeah.
It
Piety.
depends on how many pies you
Piety.
eat, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Consigns his basest impulses and strongest temptations to the darkness where the shadow hungers. So that's also why, when it's saying if you're killed by it, non-evil humanoids are the ones whose corpse, a shadow rises from their corpse. Evils actually aren't if they are somehow killed by this thing. So they specifically exist to hunt down and steal the vitality of good-natured people.
Which, I mean, I think is usually pretty easy to find in a adventuring party.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially a low-level party where they're all like, we're going to go, like, solve the problems of the world. You know,
Right.
they're so, like, gung-ho and excited.
Bright-eyed and
easy-
bushy-tailed at level 3.
Yeah. If you're playing with a group that's, like, never played D&D before, this would be a perfect enemy for a group that's, like, new to the game, to say, hey, I want to break you down. I want to destroy your expectations of this game. I think that's a really valuable tool in your tool belt.
Right. So this is also one of the type of monsters I would love to see, like, infesting a town.
Yeah.
If this is like a one-on-one fight and just like a dark cube room of a dungeon and it's your party of 4 versus this, it's not going to be that interesting. Maybe the fighter will lose a bit of strength until they take a short rest or something. But if you have an entire town that's become infected with dozens and dozens of shadows, I think that can make for a really kind of terrifying little adventure arc to try and figure out and how to survive that. And
Right.
Oh, it'd be really cool? Like, instead of having, monster spawn, everybody roll initiative, you could have, like, a villager just standing around this infested thing, and then out of nowhere, you see a shadow get up and kill him, and then, there's 2 shadows.
Yeah.
Very cool.
There's
Because
a really
there was a shadow hiding behind him.
There's a really interesting there's a side quest in The Witcher 3 where you find a character whose shadow is basically like a demon hasn't possessed the character, it's possessed their shadow. And the way you can tell is that their shadow is like a different shape than what they normally are. And so you have to, it like feeds on their fear or something like that. And so you have to like find ways to make them vulnerable by scaring them. It's kind of like a boggart or whatever in Harry Potter. But you draw the shadow out by feeding their fears and their insecurities. And when the shadow grows strong, it kind of breaks free from their form. And then you can kill it that way.
So I guess also it would help if your party is a bunch of bastards, and then maybe the shadow doesn't want anything to do with you.
Maybe.
Oh my god. That would be so good for an evil campaign. You're right, because if you like walked into that city infested by shadows, instead of it being like a huge deal that they're all going to like drain your strength and you're going to die, you guys are actually the only ones who can walk free. and you can just go around, solve the city's
God.
problems, and get paid for it, of course, because you're evil.
Right? No,
but-
exactly.
Yeah,
sure.
but you don't have those same limitations that the goody goody two shoes do, because the shadows are like, yeah, these guys are cool, and you're like, no, we're fucking not. You're getting paid. We're getting paid, so you're going down.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, another cool use for these, I think, would be this could even go up to higher levels. I could see like an evil wizard imprisoning a bunch of these at the entrance to its tower or dungeon or whatever, just for the purpose of weakening any sort of would-be intruders.
Yeah.
For sure.
Like knowing that any adventurer that's trying to come in and take on this grand wizard's probably going to get past these just fine, but they're going to have their strength drained in the process.
But you can also tie that into the sort of lore of that enemy in a really interesting way. You can say these are the shadows of all of the adventurers who came here to confront me in the past. These all exist because they all failed in their attempt at taking me down.
Why are you going to be
It
different?
also... Yeah,
for
exactly.
sure.
It also implies an interesting, like symbiotic relationship that this wizard would have been able to, like, essentially, I don't know if strike a deal is the right word to use, or maybe they're like sort of imprisoning them or using them to their advantage. But this idea that the shadows won't hurt them because they get to eat everything else that kind of comes through, and he gets the protection he's looking for,
Yeah.
or she.
I like that too. Yeah, I think there's a lot you can do there. And again, with that idea of just like, it's going to drain whoever, like the high level adventurer's strength. You throw a couple of these at them, you don't expect the shadows to just straight up kill them. But even just from like a purely mechanical mindset, this is a very good way to drain some resources, because in a best case scenario, as the DM, you might expend a Greater Restoration, which is a 5th level spell, I believe.
Yeah.
And then you might use a Revivify as well if that comes up. Or you might use Greater Restoration on a couple of people. I mean, that is a huge resource suck. If that's like the first thing you encounter, you walk in and then just boom, strength drained. Hey, you want that back up? Well, you better work for it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it can push your party towards a quest. It can establish, the seriousness of a situation. It can kind of say, like, look, here's the tone we're setting for this campaign. Like, this can be bad for you very easily. Even
Right.
low-level enemies can do serious damage against you. If you want to sort of establish whether this is going to be a really serious, dark, grim, dangerous campaign or a kind of fun, goofy, lighthearted campaign, you can use an encounter with these types of enemies to exemplify what the world is like and what the
Definitely.
tone of this adventure is going to be like. Yeah.
It's what I'm calling right now the patented kobold question. Like, how do you treat kobolds in your campaign? Because there's how, I treat them in my campaign, which is that they are vicious and ruthless, and they will lure you into a dungeon where there's a trap every 2 feet because they are smart and they are going to kill you in whatever way possible. And then there's the other side where you meet a kobold and he's goofy, and after a while you guys name him Kyle because Kyle the kobold sounds cute, and he starts adventuring with you. And, it's 100% how you want to do it. There's literally no wrong way, but I would not use a shadow in the cutesy way. The shadow is not. It is for the over-the-top, edgy campaign where, hey, you might die.
Sure. The Hot Topic brand of D&D campaigns.
Right. That's how I roll.
Yeah, the chain pant campaign.
The chains around my heart match the ones on my wallet.
Well, exactly. Yes, you get it. That's what the shadows say.
Absolutely.
I can see the shadow making for kind of a good minion to accompany Bone Claw.
Ooh, my favorite.
Ooh.
Are you guys
Yeah.
familiar with Bone Claws?
No, but it sounds cool.
I was going to say,
I made
I
an
can
ooh
pretend I
sound.
know what this is, but I don't.
We did an episode a while back.
It was the Halloween episode, actually, that we talked about it again.
Oh, yeah.
So regardless, the Bone Claw is like a failed lich. When somebody tries to ascend into lichdom, every once in a while it just doesn't go correctly. And so they become these bone claws, which basically hide out in the shadows and will very often latch on to somebody as kind of like a pseudo phylactery that they then will start leeching off their negative energy to just kill people. So they're like a perfect, like kind of a Scooby-Doo type monster, but if it was actually bad. But they are huge badasses where they just have these like giant hands with these crazy claws. They can teleport in and out of shadows, and even if they die, they like have to die in a specific way or they don't stay dead. So I could very easily see shadows being kind of minions or even just follow them around.
Yeah, sort of like a parasitic leech that they just don't care about.
Yeah, like the little fishies who hang on to sharks.
Exactly.
Yeah, remoras, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, suckerfish friends.
That's cool. I like the idea of like, you establish a relationship between enemies that makes sense. Like, why are all these bandits combined together? Why is there a lich with a bunch of undead combined together? Like, there has to be a story to the enemies just as much as there has to be a story to the party.
Right.
To kind of build that foundation and fit that into the lore or the context of your world is also really important. And assuming that every enemy you face has just as complex or as interesting of a story as your character does or as your party does, I think can be really cool.
Totally agree. When I first started DMing, though, I threw that right out the window. I had some extremely notable encounters that made zero sense. I think one of my favorites was some sea hags riding around on giant frogs while a hydra attacked.
I mean, that sounds cool.
Right. It sounds super cool, but like, I think it was specifically asked, like, why is this happening? And I was just like, I don't know. I can't explain it. But fight.
It's great. I just want to know more about a sea hag. That sounds pretty great.
Oh,
like
yeah.
a waterlogged witch.
Oh, do I have the episode for you?
Ooh.
Man, we had like 3 episodes on
Got
hags.
out of
Nice.
hand.
One of our
Well, there's a lot of them.
we had an episode where we also talked about witches and wizards.
Yeah.
And some guests that we had on were talking about how their witch was not a full witch, and we were like, well, what's the percentage? And he's like, she's about 99% hag.
There was Ben and Joe from We Speak Common. They have also a great podcast if you're interested in a similar kind of exploration of the lore of these types of enemies. They're a really fun show to check out.
Awesome. So, anything else for the shadow?
I don't have any further thoughts. I think we've given some interesting options, I think, for how to use these and an interesting exploration of kind of what they are and why they are.
I guess my question would be, how subjected or how susceptible are shadows to taunting and mimicry? Because what if they were there and they're like, we're so scary, we're going to do all this awful stuff that we just talked about, and you were like making shadow puppets on the wall, and you'd be like, ooh, look at this, it's a dog, and they're like, that's not funny.
So officially, they have a very low intelligence and do not understand any languages.
Okay.
But I also wouldn't ever be upset about that. I mean, if if a player started trying to taunt a shadow, I mean, that takes some guts. They're the first ones who are going to get strength drained, but
Nice.
I respect it.
Yeah. Well, maybe someone's is kind of suicidal and they're going for it.
And Piper makes it dark.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's great.
Darkness is funny. That's my secret, guys. It makes me laugh.
Yeah.
That's okay. All right, so that is everything around the shadows. I think they are, again, interesting, but you got to be careful with them. It's just, I could easily see a newer DM just kind of getting tripped up by all of the miscellaneous things thrown on this stat block. It is dense between all of its resistances and all of the things that can just happen with this. You throw it against your party, then they all die, then they're all mad at you. So avoid that.
Yeah, it's easy to have an oops, I TPK'd situation.
Definitely.
With them, I think, yeah.
So that's enough of the shadow. Let's go ahead and move on to our final segment here of Ask Monsters in Multiclass and Worldforge, which is going to be shortened to Ask M&M and WFP.
That was way shorter. Thank you.
This question comes from Penguin Knight, and the question is, what tips can you guys give about crafting great and memorable villains? Motivations, tactics, imagery, etc. And I think this one can be very, very loaded. We'll try and keep it relatively short here, but I will turn it over to Sam and Piper first. What do you guys think when you think of a great and memorable villain?
So this is something we talk about on the show a lot.
Constantly. You came to the right place.
Piper and I are going to have exactly the same answer on this.
It'll be different, I'm sure.
Really, you think? Okay.
We'll be on the same vein, but I'll make sure to say something different than what you say.
I think the most important thing for me is you need to have a villain that believes they are right.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's sort of a fine balance between going the Maleficent route and like going out of your way to make your villain really sympathetic. You don't need to make your villain sympathetic, but you need to have a villain that believes what they're doing is the right course of action and that it's believable that, trying to end the world is going to solve some problem. I think that's a really, really important thing. If you have to find a way to change their mind to defeat them, like that's way harder than just punching them until they stop moving. You need to find a way to actually like alter someone's perception of the world. Like that's way scarier than a person who can just like, beat you up. You need to have someone who believes in the very core of them that what they're doing is the right thing to do. I think that goes a long way towards making an understandable villain,
And I would add to that, I agree with what you say, but I would also add to it, I think, for me personally, the best villains are the ones who have a lot of panache. I think the best villains are the ones, they have almost a theme that they kind of base themselves around. And it's just this kind of presence and this aura that's always with them. They have to be very charismatic, very unfazed by certain things. Because when I picture my favorite villains, they are the ones who, they lead like some group who does a lot of it for them. But when it comes down to it, they will roll up their sleeves and they will fuck you up. But they will do it with this giant smile on their face. And there's like something about that where it's like, oh, you silly thing. You thought you could do this, but you can't. And it's just all the confidence that comes with that.
They're aloof.
Yes, exactly. I want my villains to be parading around and taunting you every step of the way. Those are my favorites.
That reminds me a lot of Yarlaxle from D&D lore as a whole. I'm not like huge on Forgotten Realms lore, but I played Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and that is like him to a T. He is this drow who just consistently changes form and like tricks the party into doing things for him, and just the entire time he just keeps this, cool, calm, collective, like everything is going my way, so who cares?
I love that.
Yeah, he's a great villain.
I think one of my other favorite things about villains that is, I've talked about this forever, but I love that villains, because they typically don't have to follow rules, they can kind of just do whatever they want. They're chaotic in that way. I think that makes them way more fun than a hero character who is, conflicted by his moral or her moral, like, quandaries to be like, oh, if only I could just beat this guy to a pulp. And the villain's like, well, guess what? I can steal whoever I want and do whatever I want. It's great.
Right.
So I love that kind of just like, untethered, kind of craziness.
I think that kind of speaks to an idea too that it's like it's probably in my opinion in a lot of situations it's better to build a story around a villain than it is to build a story around a hero, right? Like the conflict is going to be more interesting and more valuable than the solution. I always think that inherently a villain will be more interesting than the hero because the villain is the one that drives everything that happens in the story. They're the reason for the hero's journey in the first place.
Right. And I think
if you
what's
look at
different about a villain. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I cut you off.
Oh, that was it. I was just going to say the villain, I think, should be the foundation of your story.
Right. And I think what's nice about a villain is that they get to be quite resolute in what they do. There's no wavering from their stance because they don't need to. Whereas the hero, like they have to scrutinize every single decision. There has to be a question of like, is this the correct path? The villain is like, no, this is the correct path. Everything I'm doing is great.
Yeah, of course it is. Why wouldn't it be?
Exactly.
My answer would be it really depends on what you want the villain to accomplish. Within D&D, I think there is actually a lot of room for that really just kind of flat villain where they're evil, they're just looking to make their power themselves more powerful and personal gain, and they don't care who they hurt along the way. Because in D&D, your party has the agency to actually defeat that person, and that kind of really cathartic moment that comes along with overcoming that person is really great. We ran out of the abyss, and like the first kind of villain you come across, it's Mr. Selvara. She's a drow slaver who heads up the camp of where your party is, and she's just evil. She's mean. She's nasty. She does whatever is needed to get ahead. She has no problems killing people to make a point. She doesn't think she's doing the right thing. She thinks she's doing the best thing to better herself. And in our campaign, she ended up being like this recurring villain, where eventually they did get the better of her and defeated her. And I know, like Jared, we were just talking about the other day, we're more than a year away, and everyone's still saying like it was finally getting to fight her and kill her was so goddamn cathartic. It made all of it worth it. It's still like a moment people think about and talk about in that campaign, even though ultimately she was a really flat villain.
Right, but I would still give her like the as Piper said, the panache. Like she had a lot of like just what's the word I'm looking for? Like an aura about her that made you
the personality,
like, that just made you want to hate her so much.
She was arrogant and condescending and mean and short.
No, she was actually like 4'3", and I hated that. It made me so mad.
I feel something else too is like if you make a villain that wants the same things as the party, right? Like if they say I want to solve the same problem that you want to solve, but I'm going to do it in a way that you find to be morally reprehensible.
Right.
Like that can be so frustrating to say like, well, obviously we all want to stop world hunger, but you think that the best way to stop world hunger is to kill all the people who are hungry because then no one will be hungry anymore. You know, it's
okay,
like
Thanos.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Thanos approach is like, you know, stopping the problem of a finite amount of resources is just reduce the amount of people consuming the resources. Like, that's a morally problematic conclusion. And that's why someone like Thanos is an interesting villain, because you can say, I guess I can kind of easily see why they think that way, you know, and I can sort of connect with that. But like, no, it poses a moral question. You have to explain why your way is better.
Definitely. And I think those are personally some of the villains I gravitate towards, hopefully with a little bit more nuance than Thanos, just because I honestly, I think he's really basic and that's just super boring to me. It's like, oh, I'll just kill half the people in the world. Like, okay, dude, try a little bit harder. But
yeah, have you ever tracked population growth? It's gonna come back.
So I love that idea though of just like the villain that makes the party stop and go, oh, well, that's actually not a bad thing, is it? You know, it's really just about the type of story you want to tell. Now, I will ask, I haven't heard from Will. Will, you are kind of the outlier in my opinion, and what to you makes an interesting villain?
I like villains that, you know, absolutely blow the party out the water with like intellectual and moral justifications. And I think that's the beauty of when you are the DM, you have, you know, your behind the screen world, you know more than the players. So when they come at this and they're like, oh, I object morally to yours, they have more justification, they have more statistics, whatever, to make the party look kind of stupid, you know, and especially if you're bringing other people like villagers and stuff, it's like, they're going to make your party look like the bad guys. And that's really where you can just start making your players feel like they start questioning, am I on the hero's journey or am I doing the wrong thing here?
I like that. Nice. That's playing the psychological game.
You got to stay out of the spin zone, you know?
Exactly.
I'll say relatability.
Yes.
Does a lot for a good villain. That's not necessarily likability. Just you don't have to like them, but just relate to them, even if their intentions clearly are selfish. Understanding why they are that way and being able to just relate to them.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
This has given me a lot to think about, actually.
I also think a really good villain is someone who is a really bad person, but they're so... Okay, here's a test. So you know you've made a good villain when they're a horrible bastard, but once you tell someone about them, they're like, ooh, really? Like, tell me more. This sounds cool. Like, maybe I'm on the side of this bad guy. It's like, then you've made a good villain.
Are the positive traits do they overwhelm the negative traits, right? Like if they're so charismatic and likable. I think like Don Draper or Roger Sterling are good examples of that, where like
Not so much Roger, in my opinion.
okay,
Roger's
maybe,
more of an asshole.
But they're so charming in a certain way that
Yes.
it kind of makes it like I overlook a little bit how much of a terrible person you are. You know, like I think you have to make these sort of, you have to balance this. You have to make these sort of justifications are, do I like you more than I hate you? And based on what criteria, to make you question these types of judgments.
Yeah.
All right. So that gives me a lot to think about. I've got a villain brewing in my campaign that the group here is a couple sessions away from meeting, and there might be some rewrites in the work.
Sweet. You're welcome, guys, and we're sorry.
I'm sure that it won't end with them just dying right away, but it might.
That all depends on them.
Hey, if you make a villain that pulls off all of the stuff we talked about, that's going to be awesome. Relatable, one we can understand where they're coming from because they think they're doing something good for the world. Likable, charismatic, and completely bests us consistently, outsmarting us, making us look like complete fools. Because then when we finally do best them, it's going to be cathartic as hell.
Absolutely.
So that's true,
For sure.
but also, like, are they a villain?
Well, that's where...
Yeah, that's where it's antagonist versus villain comes in.
Exactly.
Maybe they're not a villain, but they are against what we are going for.
You
And so thus
you
they're
can
an
be a
antagonist.
bad guy without being a bad guy, as we all learned from Wreck-It Ralph, I think.
Yeah, exactly. The icing on the cake is they just have to end that entire checklist by being like, oh, by the way, I'm your dad. Hi.
Also, I love puppies, and it's like, oh, damn it.
It's like, no.
You've been redeemed.
And maybe it is. I mean, that's kind of what it's just saying. If, like, maybe they aren't just a villain, maybe they are, again, this just antagonist idea. It would be equally, if not more cathartic, to bring them around to your side, where this entire time you just keep like fighting against them. But finally you like just uncover the one puzzle piece that's like, oh, actually, we are right because of this reason.
Yeah, that'd be great. Or,
Right, yeah.
something comes along and it's like, we have no choice but to team up. Yeah,
Have a Hobbs and Shaw situation.
there you go.
All right, so I think that's enough around villains, and that will be it for our show. Thank you so much, Piper and Sam, for joining us. It was seriously great having you guys on, and it was great being on your show as well. I hope we can do something again, or something like this again in the future.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We would love that. We had a lot of fun here, and on both accounts. This was a blast.
Absolutely. And I learned a lot because I don't typically know a whole bunch about these kind of things. So lots of cool details were absorbed today.
Awesome. As usual, to our listeners, if there was anything that we missed, just feel free to send it our way through Twitter, through Reddit, through Smoke Signal, whatever makes you happy. If you, for some reason, found there was an amazing combination of Artificer Monk that we missed, please, I would absolutely love to hear it, because obviously I like talking about multi-classes. We've got a whole show around it. And with that, Kevin, you've got the final words.
Thanks for listening.
Next time on Monsters in Multiclass.
We're back talking about an exciting multi-class opportunity, the Bard Fighter, as well as the Gyno Sphinx and the Mr. Sphinx.
Mr. and Mrs.
Was
Sphinx.
that right, Piper? Mr. and Mrs. Sphinx?
Yes.
Cut. You're beautiful. I love it.
Woo! We did it!
Great.